Elbridge Gerry, of Mandarin fame, despised democracy. The dolts waste votes, duped by dishonest and double-tongued demagogues. The evils we experience flow from the excess of democracy. The people are played by pretended patriots. Jerry was one of the wedges who would drive the dialogue and debate on deciding who duty would deem worthy of picking a president. His first endorsement was an executive elected by the executives, with each governor casting a vote. But that idea was not to be, so he shifted. Now, the delegates were distrustful of a strong federal government, too easy to derive a dictator, and they had just trounced a tyrant, and truth be told, they made sure it was told. They didn't want too strong of an executive. But they had to balance. The president couldn't be too weak. When someone suggested that Congress control the keys to the country's presidency, an idea backed by Madison and others who didn't like the prospect of independent presidents, someone pointed out that that had been a failure of the Articles of Confederation, and it wouldn't work for the new nation. Still, the position would persist for most of the process. James Wilson and George Mason suggested a popular vote, though Mason would quickly concede that it would probably be impracticable. See, he and his company realized that they resided in a reality in 1787, and reality was that a big country wasn't conducive to convenient communication or timely travel in a campaign. The other concern with a popular vote was the presumption that the presidency produced would be a perennial product of the population powerhouses, the most populous states, to the chagrin of smaller states, and slave states whose slaves obviously couldn't vote. Madison pointed out that the smaller slave states were necessary to adopt and implement the Constitution, so their concerns had to be a consideration. It can be pointed out that no less than half of the population lived in just 4 states, with over 20% in Virginia alone. So fair's fair, and they flitted on. Eventually, they settled on electors, chosen by state legislatures and distributed by congressional allotment, the basic framework that survives today. Although the legislatures have left the choice up to the people, after all, and largely limit the electors to voting as instructed by the voters. In the end, the driving concerns were that presidents would win based on regional popularity and their positions in populated states. And we got the Electoral College to attempt to avoid that actuality. But then they missed the rest of reality. Political parties, which were predominantly perceived as a pariah, didn't care. They were practical to political practice and prevailed as a pervading political presence in the post revolutionary world. The party system propagated proficiently and to directly and it directly addressed the concerns about both organizing and campaigning, for better or worse. Also, politicians from large states still ended up with the opportunity and political machines necessary to dominate the presidency. While the parties did a good job of promoting their nominees, the nomination process was heavily biased. 18 of the first 20 presidents came from states that were in the top 5 most populated when the presidents became president. So the smaller states never really had a chance to get their day in the sun. The Electoral College failed in its two biggest goals. In the 1920s, things started to change. Parties implemented presidential primaries to pick their nominees, and mass communication was becoming possible and prominent. The first commercial radio broadcast happened in November 1920, appropriately reporting results of the presidential election. With mass communication, the automobile, and air travel, campaigning directly to the people was no longer impractical, and the primary system meant that 10 of the last 16 people elected president were from states outside of the top 5 most populated: FDR, Nixon, Reagan, George W. Bush, Obama, and Trump being the exceptions. So, since the Electoral College failed in every goal it was created to achieve, except for persuading the smaller enslaved states to ratify the Constitution, why is it still so sacred to some people? Why not move towards the same principles that have emerged everywhere else? One person, one vote. Every vote being equal is an essential aspect of a fair and balanced democracy. Every other elected office in our republic is chosen by this guide since the since the 17th Amendment put the Senate into the hands of the people? Why is the one person who represents every American not chosen by every American equally? The reality is that the system we have has always favored a few states deciding the outcome, another end that proponents of the existing system claim they want to avoid. But the math belies their biggest fears, because the minorities in each state would actually reduce the weight of every individual state. So a candidate would actually have to appeal to more people. People would be choosing our leaders, all of our leaders. It's the hallmark of a republic, and it's time that we choose our president. A final note on the discussion. Despite driving disapproval of direct democracy deciding the direction of the presidency, Elbridge Gerry didn't even sign his name to the compromise of the Electoral College. Gerry didn't sign the Constitution when it was finished.